So what I'm going to do is we're going to start a new topic, and I'll give you the reason for starting the topic, and this was suggested by someone, which is a hint. If you suggest something, I'll probably go with it, because I hate sitting in my office for 3 hours trying to figure, what am I going to talk about? So I love the constant roll of ideas. And so it was suggested to me, well, why don't we talk about the prophet Jeremiah? And I think that's a good idea. And I want to base it on this passage from the Gospel of Matthew. So I'm in Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. It says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem. Hang on. No, I don't want that verse. I want 13. Matthew 16:13. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Now, I don't think that means that people were believing that Jesus was the resurrected Old Testament prophet. No. And I don't even think they meant some sort of reincarnation, that he is Jeremiah come back in a new body or something like that. What they mean is, Jesus, we think you embody the spirit, the teaching, the style, the content of maybe someone like Elijah. But it's interesting, everyone who's named is a prophet, right? Because John the Baptist was viewed as a prophet. So they name only prophets. John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, or maybe one of the others. But you're definitely a prophet, Jesus. People are seeing you as a prophet. Well, we might ask, well, why would they think Jeremiah is specifically named as one of the prophets that Jesus might be, as it were, channeling with his style of teaching and things? So what I want us to do, what we're going to do is not take a kind of lengthy move through Jeremiah looking at each chapter. I've picked out some highlight incidents, teachings, things from Jeremiah the prophet, which I think, number one, will perhaps catch us by surprise in some ways, maybe not expecting it, but also see how this is something that very much resonates with the ministry of Jesus. So that's my overall plan, my thought, my goal. So any questions at this point? Any thoughts? All right, let me share this screen. Hopefully this works for everyone online as well as here. Okay, maybe okay. That's not too bad. Okay, like I said, I hope you can see it, or you might need to be, huh?
Thanks for the big print.
Yeah, I tried. So I found a simple map off the internet, and what we've got to do is a little bit of an introduction to Jeremiah, because we got to set it in context. We got to understand what's going on. So if you like history, you might like this. If you don't, sorry. Okay, so I want to start in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, of the priests who were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. It also came in the days of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the end of the 11th year of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the exile of Jerusalem in the 5th month. So Jeremiah starts by saying these words came to Jeremiah starting in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah and extending through the reign of two of his sons, Jehoiakim and Zedekiah, until Babylon captures Jerusalem and the people are exiled. So that's a period of time. And I want us to see what's happening during that period of time so that we can make sense of the context, right? So here's my simple map. And you can see Turkey up here, present-day Turkey. There's Israel along the coast. You've got Egypt. Well, Egypt is almost down there in the corner. Here's Egypt. I put in Saudi Arabia, and I put in parentheses desert. It's a little bit hidden by the bar from Zoom. And the reason is significant because nobody travels through Saudi Arabia from east to west. In the ancient world, this area right here is called the Fertile Crescent. You've got the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, and that area is the Fertile Crescent, and so all traffic goes this way. If it's going to go from Egypt up here, it's going to come through Israel, and it's going to go like that. Nobody cuts through here. Armies do not go through Saudi Arabia, right? Armies come this way, and this is going to be significant because of what happens. Over here, you've got Persia, present-day Iran. You've got Mesopotamia, which is present-day Iraq, which is also identified with Babylon. Babylon's down here on the Euphrates. Nineveh, which is one of the capital cities of Assyria, is up here on the Tigris. Assyria actually had 4 capital cities. Assyria has been the empire for 1,000 years, right? Assyria's been an empire for 1,000 years. But we're talking about a time where that shifts. Babylon rises, takes over Assyria, and all of this drama Israel gets to experience, right? They're in the middle of it.
Can you point to Constantinople about where?
It would be right.
Oh, okay.
It would be. It's right there. There's where it is.
Thank you.
There's the Black Sea. There's Greece. It's right there up there on the isthmus, right? So politically, Israel is in a bad spot. They live on the thoroughfare between an empire of Egypt, which is ancient, and all the empires up here. And guess what happens? Everyone traipses right through this middle part. It is the worst place. They might be saying, God, why did you give us the land of Canaan? Right?
To be the minority and the example to the rest of the world, that people had to go through that area, isn't that?
Yeah. They're stuck between empires to their north and south, and so everyone's always coming through there, and they're always liable to be victimized by empires both north and south, right? And part of what they self-understand is their mission, if they understand it well, is to be a light to the nations. Because they're not tucked away in some corner. They're in the middle of everything. And what Moses says to them and what the prophets say is you are to be a light to all these other nations. Because they will know about you because you're on the road that they use with their interaction with one another. So while they're small and in many ways insignificant, they're in the middle of everything, right?
I like that example because it says we're not the moral majority, we're the minority.
Yeah.
Even today to be thinking, not as ourselves as a big nation, but a small majority
Yeah.
to be part of the
Yeah, the analogy that for the church we are the salt. Jesus says we are the salt of the earth. Well, there's a lot more earth than there is salt, but the point is, in the very same way, we though may be smaller, the minority in terms of number, and that's okay. That's how God positioned us. We are to have an outsized influence for good, right? Pushing back the hatred and the anger and the division. We should not be engaging in it. We should be pushing back against it. Yeah, very much the same. Israel is our story, right? What we see in them is our story. We're positioned in a similar fashion. Okay, so I want to follow what happens. So it all starts with Josiah. Does anyone remember anything about Josiah? Well, it's not going to help if I can't advance my slides. So hang on. Seems like Derek told me there was a problem with this, right? Didn't you once tell me that you had a same issue? I can't get the slide to advance.
There we go.
Did it?
Something's happening.
Oh, something's happening. Oh, it's working now. Okay. So let's start with, here we go. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so here we start. The first king that's mentioned is King Josiah. Anyone remember anything about King Josiah?
King at 8.
Yeah, 8 years old, he becomes the boy king, right? And something significant happens during his reign is they're cleaning out the temple. There's this impetus to kind of clean things up and get themselves back right with God, and they're cleaning out the temple, and they discover a copy of the law in the temple that they kind of lost. It might tell you how bad things had gotten, you know. And so some reforms start under Josiah. Take down the idols and the altars, and let's return to God. That all happens in the reign of King Josiah. Well, Jeremiah says very specifically that Jeremiah is called in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah. The reform starts in the 18th year of Josiah's reign. Okay? So he's ministering, proclaiming a message for 5 years before there's an impetus towards actually, hey, maybe we ought to change, maybe. And so he's probably had a part in that, right? Because his call for what it means to be the people of God has probably influenced Josiah's reforms. But here's a significant date. 609 BC, what happens is Egypt to the south, well, maybe I need to say, by Josiah's reign, Judah, Israel, has been under the influence of Assyria for 120 years. They've been their vassal, their servant, paying taxes, sending tribute money to Assyria. And that's 120 years of being under Assyrian rule, okay? So they haven't really been independent for 120 years or so. So what happens in 609, for reasons I don't think we really know, the Pharaoh in Egypt, Pharaoh Necho, decides he is going to come up here to help the Assyrians because Babylon has started to rise as a rival to Assyria, and they're moving against Assyria. And Pharaoh's going up there to help Assyria against the Babylonians. And again, for reasons that the text does not explain to us, King Josiah decides he's going to go out and try and fight against the Egyptians as they're headed north, which is interesting because it's not like they're attacking Judah. They're passing through the highway. And for whatever reasons, maybe because Josiah, you can speculate, maybe because Josiah is under Assyrian influence and they're moving up here to help, is he thinking, I don't want them to help the Assyrian? I don't know what he's thinking.
Do we not have the social media?
Yeah, we don't have his Twitter account to know what he was tweeting out while he was planning this. But here's what happens. Josiah is killed in that battle against the Egyptians. He dies.
How old was he?
That was a figure I did not look up. I'm not sure. I think I saw that his reign was for 34 years. If that's true, he's 42. But don't quote me on that one. So he dies in that conflict. His son, who is not mentioned here in the text, is actually put on the throne, but he only has a few months to reign because when the Egyptians get done with their business and they successfully help Assyria beat back the Babylonians, the Egyptians come back to Judah. Like they beat the Jews on their way north, then they went on their way north, won the battles up there, and then came back, and it's payback time to Judah, right? So he deposes the guy who's on the throne and puts the second guy mentioned in Jeremiah, Jehoiakim, on the throne. You reign, you're a son of Josiah, but you're now kind of under Egyptian, right? I mean, he's still under Assyria, but the Egyptians were in league with Assyria, and they've been vassals of Assyria for 120 years. So things haven't really changed much, except they got their tails whipped. Josiah got killed. He's the last good king of Judah, who traditionally the Jews say that Jeremiah wrote 2 Kings, the book we call 2 Kings. And the books of 1st and 2nd Kings are really written from the perspective of the prophets. It's the prophets giving an evaluation of the kings. And that's why those books say this king was no good. Well, who's saying that? The prophets are. Because the prophets are the one who are rendering the verdict. And Josiah gets the verdict of here was a man who actually tried to serve God and do what was right. The rest, there's only 4 that do. The rest of them all get a failing grade. This was not a good king. Okay, so that's what happens. Now it's Jehoiakim, and what happens when that occurs? Now we've got Jehoiakim on the throne. So the same thing plays out 4 years later, right? 605. Egypt is once again moving up here to help the Assyrians. Babylon is making a push for the Assyrian Empire. And this time at the Battle of Carchemish, which is a ford right here on the Euphrates, the Battle of Carchemish in 605, the Egyptians lose to the Babylonians. The Babylonians succeed in defeating Assyria. And the Egyptians are going to retreat back to Egypt and never again really involve themselves in the politics of things up around the Euphrates, right? They just turned back, right? So 605. Now this time Jehoiakim doesn't get involved, right? He doesn't try and thwart the movement of the Egyptians. He stays out of it in 605. But this is significant because this is Babylon taking power over Assyria. And so then what happens is the Babylonians who've gone upwards and taken over Assyria now come south and gobble up the lands that have been under Assyrian control because now they're the empire. Does that make sense? I mean, of course they're going to come to Judah and say, you're paying taxes now to us, not to Assyria anymore, but to us, because we've taken over the empire, right? We rule. So they come, and Jehoiakim concedes. He doesn't try and put up a fight. He says, you're my new master. That's fine. That sounds good. We'll send gold to you. We'll send gold to Babylon instead of sending it to Nineveh and associated capitals of Assyria. But what happens is, see the little name Daniel in blue? In 605, that's when Daniel goes in captivity to Babylon. Remember, the story is that some of the princes, some of the outstanding young men of Israel were deported from Israel to be in Babylon. So that's part of Babylonian foreign policy, right? There wasn't a war with Israel, but some of your princes are going to come and, we're going to educate them there in Babylon because we're now taking over everything. So Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and some others all go over to Babylon. That's why he's over there in blue. That's 605. Okay? Questions? Loving the history, right? Just loving the history. But this is all that's going on. When you're reading Jeremiah, this is the drama going on. And when he's calling the nation to certain things, you got to realize it's against this backdrop. Because the prophets are highly political. He's always warning an enemy's going to come from the north. Well, do you notice there's only 2 directions an enemy can come from in terms of Israel? It's not going to come from the west. Nobody's going to do an amphibious invasion of Palestine, right? And it's not going to come from the east because no one's coming through the desert. There's only 2 options. It's either from the south, and that means one empire only, Egypt, or it's from the north, whoever is reigning up north, which has been the Assyrians, but now it's the Babylonians, right? So when he's saying these things, he's very much speaking into the drama of what's going on. And that's the background of how he's speaking to the people. So that's what happens in 605. Well, in 597, Jehoiakim gets the idea, you know what? I think I can rebel against Babylon. Great plan there, Jehoiakim. And Jeremiah is not in favor of this move. It's like, no, you're an idiot, right? I mean, basically the prophets keep trying to tell the kings, stay out of these things. And the Lord is not going to deliver you if you pull some silly stunt. Well, 597, Jehoiakim says, I think I can free us from the Babylonians. So, here come the Babylonians. They come right around that Fertile Crescent from the north, come sweeping down. They succeed in putting down Israel. Jehoiakim actually dies during the siege, which is a 3-month siege. His son Jehoiakim gets put on the throne, who gets to reign for all of 3 months until the city falls. And what happens is Nebuchadnezzar says, Jehoiakim, you're off the throne. I'm going to put Zedekiah on the throne instead. And you are going to serve Babylon. And see the second blue name? Ezekiel. This is when, in 597, is when a bunch of people get deported to Babylon. And Ezekiel is among that group. And so when you read the book of Ezekiel, you're getting the words of a prophet who is in Babylon among the Israelites who've been deported in 597. Now, Daniel's already been there for what? Right? Since 605. So when they show up, it's like, hey, we've already been here for a while, right? I mean, being treated somewhat, not like slaves. They were brought in as princes, I think probably to be trained in Babylonian ways, maybe someday to be seen as those who might be sent back to govern some of these provinces, but now with a Babylonian education and perspective. That's just my guess is what's going on.
You said Nebuchadnezzar, he's the ruler of Babylon?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this happens in 597. He puts Zedekiah on the throne. Zedekiah says, hey, 587, 10 years, maybe we can do it this time. Brilliant move. Like, we're great at this, right? So 10 years later, he tries the same thing as Jehoiakim. Like, we're gonna do this. And of course, here come the Babylonians. And this is the time they utterly destroy Jerusalem. They destroy the temple, right? The last time, 10 years earlier, they conquered Jerusalem. They switched the kings. They carried off a bunch of people with Ezekiel, but they didn't destroy the temple. This time, the temple goes, right? It's a more thorough destruction of Jerusalem. And so a bunch more people get carried off into captivity. Now, beyond the scope of Jeremiah. So what happens is, and all this time, of course, Jeremiah is over here. He's a contemporary with Ezekiel. While Ezekiel's prophesying over in Babylon, Jeremiah is preaching over here in Judah. And they're saying the same thing, very much like telling the people of God, here's how you have to live in the context of what's going on, right? Well, what happens after the story, after Jeremiah, is in 539, here come the Persians from the east. They conquer Babylon. They find all these Jews living there who've been carried into captivity, and they begin a new foreign policy. And their policy is, we're going to repatriate these people back to their homeland if they want to go, which is a good idea if you want to kind of build some sense of goodwill, right? Oh, all these Jews, you're all living here in Babylon. Where'd you come from? Oh, okay. We'll let you go home. Of course, you're still going to be under our rule. You're still going to pay gold now to Persia, but we're going to try and be nice about it. And so that's when you have like your book of Ezra. Ezra returns and they rebuild the temple, the first kind of big mass migration back. Then you're familiar with Nehemiah. He comes after Ezra, another big migration back, and now they build the walls of Jerusalem with permission from the Persian king, because that could look like a rebellious act. And you better make sure the king understands what you're doing and agrees, because if you build the walls without his permission, he's going to come tear them down, right? Right? So all that starts to happen in 539. But that's after Jeremiah. Okay. Questions, thoughts? That help? A lot of drama going on, right? A lot of drama during Jeremiah's days as a prophet. All right? Okay. Then what I want us to notice then, we're done with the map, we're done with the history lesson. What I want us to notice now is, let's look in Jeremiah chapter 1, the first point of points I want us to make. And like I said, I'm going to pick thematically some different things each week to look at. So Jeremiah chapter 1, starting in verse 4. So now let's just look at how it opens. The first 3 verses set the historical setting, and if you don't know, if you just read those names, King so-and-so, what? But now we know during the reigns of King Josiah, King Jehoiakim, and King Zedekiah up until the exile, you're like, yeah, that's a rough period. That's a hard time for Israel. It wasn't always that bad, but that was a really difficult 30, 40 years, right? Starting in verse 4, now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. What do you notice? Nations. I didn't appoint you a prophet to Judah. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. What does that tell us?
He's not talking about the United States.
Yeah. And he's not talking like the only people I care about is Israel and the Jews. You are a prophet speaking the message of God to who? The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Jews, the Syrians, not the Assyrians, but the Syrians, all of the nations. Because God has never had this kind of limited view that he's like only interested or primarily interested in one small group of people. That's not how Jeremiah understands his role. And to Bob's comment, we don't need to try and look at it like God is especially concerned with us, our nation or our church or whatever. No, God's always been concerned about the whole of humanity and everyone getting his message of love and reconciliation, which is still what Jeremiah is going to preach. So Jeremiah hears from God that you've been appointed as a prophet to the nations. Well, maybe we need to talk a little bit about prophet. A lot of times when we hear the term prophet, we think someone who foretells the future, kind of like a fortune teller, like going to a tarot card reader or somebody. That was the main job of the prophets, was to predict future events. No, that's not a good definition. Basically, instead of saying the prophets foretold, a way to say it is they spoke forth the word of God. It wasn't about foretelling the future as much as it was about saying what God is saying, right? They speak for God. And it's not usually about predicting, guess what's going to happen in the future. Most of the time, it's more about how do you need to be living now? And given what's going on, what do you need to do now? And a lot of times, even when there is something about future events, it's not super specific. Jeremiah keeps saying, you're going to face an enemy from the north. Well, it doesn't take a genius to know there's only 2 options, north or south. And he keeps saying it's not really the southern. All the turmoil is more up north. And that's where the enemy is going to come from. but he's always telling them how. He doesn't even name who it's going to be. He just more talks about what posture do you need to take in the midst of this crisis, right? What do you need to be doing? So a prophet to the nations is not so much about telling the future. It's about talking about the present and how to live in a God-informed way.
Seems more dangerous than talking about the future.
Yes, in a lot of ways it is, right? It'll get you into more trouble. It got Jeremiah into lots of trouble by telling people what he was telling them, right? We'll see some of that. Okay, but continuing on verse 6, then I said, alas, Lord God, behold, I do not know how to speak because I am a youth. He's probably like 24 or 25. I mean, he's not a teenager, but at the same time, it's not like he's a respected man of, wisdom in that culture. 24, 25, you're still a young man, and you don't have the credibility. So you can see his pushback is, I don't know that you're picking the right person, God. I mean, who am I at 24, 25 to start speaking and telling people what God is really doing and about and what he wants us to do? I mean, I'm going to get dismissed. I think that's what he's thinking. Verse 7, but the Lord said to me, do not say I am a youth, because everywhere I send you, you shall go, and all that I command you, you shall speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. Then the Lord stretched out his hand and touched my mouth. Sounds like Isaiah, doesn't it? Isaiah chapter 6. Bring the coal, touch your lips, give you the ability to speak, cleanse your mouth, because you're thinking, I can't do this. Then the Lord stretched out, verse 9, stretched out his hand and touched my mouth, and the Lord said to me, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. See, I have appointed you this day over the nations and over the kingdoms, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. Okay, here's a summary of what his message is. And it's for all the kingdoms, for all the nations, and it's got this pattern to it. To pluck up and break down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. What do you notice about that little summary?
Destruction comes before growth.
Yes. The order is super important. Because we can think, the prophets were all about negativity, all about doom and gloom. The order here is important. Yes, there's some things that need to be plucked up, broken down, destroyed, and overthrown. Why? To build and to plant. That's the end goal. It's always to build and to plant. In fact, if you look in our Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, there are all kinds of statements like God says, I kill and I make alive. He never says, I make alive and I kill. He never ends on, and the end will be death. He always ends on, and the end will be life. So then we ask ourselves, well, then what are you killing so that you will give life? Or what are you destroying so that you will build and plant and establish, right? So this is the prophetic pattern that we have to bear in mind when we're reading things that sound like they're all about destruction. Because when there is something about destruction, it's a prelude to the establishment of something good and new. Now, why would Jesus be compared to Jeremiah? Why would people listen to Jesus go, you know what, you could be Jeremiah? Did Jesus ever talk about destroying, overthrowing, so that something new could be built and planted? Yeah, destroy this temple of my body in 3 days, I'll raise it up, right? Because we're going to end on life. Okay? What else? What is it? When does he talk about destroying and tearing down and overthrowing?
Some of the preconceived notions that they had.
You've heard that it's been said, thou shalt not murder. But I say to you, what's he doing? He's taking 10 commandments and he's tearing them down in some ways. Right? At the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, I don't think I came to abolish the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill it. He's naming what he knows people think he's doing. I listen to you, Jesus, and it sounds like all you're doing is tearing down all of our revered traditions and commandments from the Lord, and it sounds like all you're doing is tearing things down. And Jesus insists, I'm not here to abolish, I'm here to fulfill. But I sure know it sounds like I'm here to abolish. And every time I heal on the Sabbath, it sounds like I am just disregarding keeping the Sabbath holy. But you know what? I got to tear some stuff down. And what I got to tear down is your idea that on a holy day, we are to refrain from doing good. Because you've got that idea lodged in your heads. That it's a Sabbath day, we must rest. He's in need. Well, we'll just have to wait till tomorrow. And Jesus is like, no, you don't. Is he tearing stuff down? Is he overthrowing preconceived ideas? Is he overthrowing interpretations of the law, of the Sabbath, of who God is? He's tearing down and destroying a lot. But it's always to build something, right? It's never destruction for destruction's sake. It never ends on that. It always is a prelude to, we got to clear away what is dead so that then we can raise up what is living, right? To me, I think, yeah, Jesus is doing this all the time, right? All the time. He's saying, woe to you, Pharisees. You do this, you do that. He's tearing down. Yeah? He says, oh, the Pharisees love to be called rabbi in the marketplace. And they love to extend the fringes of their garments to show how prayerful they are. None of that. My disciples are not to do any of that. You're not supposed to have titles. You're supposed to pray in secret. I'm getting rid of all this ostentatious show of spirituality. I'm tearing down all these traditions, right? Because I'm going to build something new. Following what I'm saying? See how but this is I think this is super significant because we have this tendency, and I have great sympathies with it, we have this tendency to read someone like Jeremiah and see so much negativity that we're thinking, wow, this is nothing like Jesus. But I think if we read it carefully, we'll say, wait a minute, there's a lot of hope in here too, and a lot of new life, and a lot of resurrection being talked about, raising up something. Yes, there's a lot of talk about what needs to be destroyed, but it's always ending on the resurrection note. That's the pattern of Jewish prophetic tradition. Okay, Bob had something, and then...
Well, I just think of the prophets spent a lot of time talking about here's how Israel needs to act, or you're going to get hauled off again. And so I guess that's what created a lot of that.
Yeah. So, and if we were to count number of words, there's probably more words about the warnings about you do this and this terrible thing's going to happen to you, which is a warning, which is not wishing the terrible thing to happen, is trying to tell the people, look, if you do this, if you go down this path, this is what's going to happen. It's not wanting that to happen.
You started out saying this is nations, meaning for all nations.
Yeah.
But Israel really spent a lot of time, those guys talking about the nation needs to act like this. The nation needs to do this right.
Yeah. And the thing is, it doesn't translate to our geopolitical nation states today. Israel is not an analog for the United States or Bolivia or any country. When we're reading about Israel, we're reading about the people of God. And the people of God today is those of us who, in great fragility, try and follow Jesus. We're Israel. So he's not talking about political realities and like that we would then, yeah.
I think we balled that up.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, people will read Old Testament things and say, well, this is true. If this was promised, then if we do this, America will be strong. It isn't talking about geopolitical entities. It's talking about people of God. If the people of God do these things. So if you saw, I sent out something about Substack, not trying to get you to go to Substack. If you don't go to Substack, that's fine. you'll still, if you get the things I send out on my blog, you'll still get them as before. But like I put a little thing on Substack on Friday, which what I'm going to do is not just post articles, but I put the comment, Jeremiah has a lot to say. If we don't read it about others, but see it, but if the church is willing to examine itself or something like that. Because it was that idea that because I was reading the whole book of Jeremiah, because I gotta get the whole thing back in my mind if I'm going to teach this, even though we're going to take bits. I was reading it and thinking about the church. I'm like, this isn't about nations. This is about us as the people of God and where we line ourselves up in terms of how we live in this world. It's like, wow, there's a lot to say here. His warnings are, the people of God, how are you thinking? What are you doing? Who are you aligning yourself with? Who's Egypt and who's Babylon today? To the church, right? To the church. Who is our Babylon that we need to be warned of that could come and get us from the north, right? Okay. We'll go. Rachel, you start, raise your hand. So.
I feel like it's a dumb question.
No dumb questions.
Talking about being a prophet to the nations at that time or in the future, because I was thinking, was there much like conversion of these other peoples to Judaism at the time?
Yeah, okay, great question. See, it's a great question. I'm glad you raised it. A couple things I would say is, number one, the purpose of prophecy is not conversion. It's really not to get these other people to become Jews. It's to get them to follow God as well. But I'm glad you raised it, because we could easily be thinking that's what it's about. So, like my major Old Testament professor in graduate school was John T. Willis, and he would do this. He'd go through and say, you're going through Isaiah. It says a prophecy to, and it's saying a prophecy to Egypt. And he asks us, well, do you think it was actually sent to the Egyptians? And his point was, yes. It was like these prophets didn't just like hunker down and stay at home and only speak to their own people. You look through, and like in Isaiah, there'll be a prophecy addressed to various nations. And the point was, they were being prophets to nations. But again, the great question. They're not asking them to become Jews. They're asking them, hear the word of the Lord for you. What should Egypt be doing? And it's often a warning. If you follow what you're doing, it's going to end poorly for you. Again, it's not a threat. There's a big difference between a warning and a threat. Right? You can warn your children or you can threaten your children. I hope you do more warning than threatening, right? Threatening is what I will do to you. Warning is what will happen if you, right? So these are warnings, not threats. Okay?
Greg, were there non-Jewish prophets?
Yeah. They even show up in the Old Testament.
I was thinking there was, but I couldn't think.
Well, like Balaam, right? When they're coming out of Egypt, Balaam is seen as someone who speaks truly. Whatever God is saying. He's a true prophet of God. He's not an Israelite. The Israelites are coming out of Egypt, and he's a guy they encounter along the way, kind of in Midian. Remember, he's the one that the king tries to bribe to curse Israel, and he does it for the money, but every time he tries to, he can't actually enunciate the words of cursing, right? Is the way the story goes. Yeah, so there are prophets who are not Jews, who are not Israelites. So, yeah. So sometimes maybe we don't understand. I think these other nations heard what the prophet Jeremiah was saying in Israel. It's not like the message didn't get carried. And I think they would have heard what was being said in other places. No, they didn't have social media, but messages still got carried, right? People still heard about what was being said.
Would they have been on Twitter?
Would the prophet say we should be on Twitter? That would be the question. Now, I'm not assuming an answer. I'm just saying they might have something to say, at least how we engage social media. All right. Well, we'll stop here. So today was a lot of introduction and some history what we'll do next week is we'll start taking little vignettes, little pieces of Jeremiah that I think are intriguing. The first one we're going to take is out of chapter 3 about how radical God's love is. It's as radical a picture of love as you will find anywhere in Scripture. And here it is right in the middle of an Old Testament prophet that we kind of think is all about doom and condemnation. He's got a picture of God's love actually going against the rules. That's what he says in Jeremiah 3. So what we're going to do each week is take some of these things, and I hope you will be like, I can't believe it. But that's Jeremiah's point. The law says God shouldn't love us, but God's going to do it anyway. He's going to break the law and do the right thing. So that's where we'll pick it up next week. Thanks for your thoughts.